to talk about tonight is we're going to talk about creativity and passion and dreams and that voice or that idea inside of you that you sometimes don't even want to say out loud, because if you say it out loud, you might have to do it. And if you do it, it might change your life, and that might be terrifying. What I find is that generally, men have no problem with this. They have like their regular job, and then they have like interests or passions or hobbies or entrepreneurial ideas, and they say things like, I have a fabulous idea, and in fact, you should give me money to make this idea. It's amazing. And then women come to me with tears and whispers, and they tell me about that thing that they can't stop thinking about, and they don't even want to say it out loud to me, and I'll never see them again. And so what I have found over the last couple of years is I think we live in a world that makes it kind of no-brainers for men to say, like, you know what? This is worth my time. It's worth my money, and it's worth my expertise, and I'm going to take a risk. And somehow that same world does not say the same thing to women. So somehow we start thinking, this is probably dumb, and probably I will fail, and probably I will be embarrassed, and probably I should just take care of other people and other people's dreams. That's probably a safer plan. I think that is rampant in our culture, and I think it's a tragedy. I think that the ideas and the gifts and the passions and the dreams that God gives to women are going undiscovered and unacted upon all over. And I can't imagine what the world would be like if all of us did something about those dreams instead of putting them on a shelf and helping other people's dreams come to life. Does that make sense? So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. For me, my dreams have mostly manifested themselves in the creative area. That's not true for everyone. I don't want to say that everyone has like some secret little dream to like paint or tap dance or something. But I am surprised at how often, I'm not kidding you, everywhere I go, someone waits for me afterwards, usually a woman, and they tell me as though it's a terribly shameful secret, I have always wanted to write my stories. And I always say the same thing. Then you should, because we need more stories. We need more great books, more great stories, more stories of hope, more stories of freedom, more stories of redemption. And so, I'm going to start with a chapter from Cold Tangerines called Needle and Thread. When Henry was born, we brought music into the delivery room that we thought would be the right sounds for him and for me to serve as the soundtrack for his birth. We played songs by Ben Folds and Snow Patrol and Johnny Cash and the Beatles, and even now when I listen to that playlist, it takes me back to that room, to the bright light in an otherwise dark room, to the tears running down my mom's face, and to Aaron's wide eyes, looking at once scared and amazed. Just after Henry was born, when Linda the nurse was weighing and measuring him, and his thin little gasping first cries sounded like the most beautiful sounds we had ever heard. At that moment, the only other thing we could hear in the middle of the night in a silent hospital was a song called Needle and Thread by Sleeping at Last. It's about God and angels and hospitals and love, and in that moment, it became ours, our song, Henry's song. Henry yelped and wiggled under the yellow light of the bassinet, and I laid motionless in the bed, spent and relieved and overwhelmed, like I had done something brave and now my work was done. We heard the song again a few days later in our car when we brought Henry home from the hospital. Aaron was driving and I was sitting in the back seat next to Henry in his car seat, my arms stretched over him, shielding him from any possible harm. I was also practicing Jedi mind tricks, willing all the other cars on the road to slow down and back away from our car. I imagined that everyone else on the road was either a bank robber in a getaway car, or a crazy person or a drunk, and I glared at each one of them, preemptively rage-filled at their recklessness. And then that song began, and my rage and anxiety braided themselves into tense, muscular love. I cried all the way home, thinking about how God and his angels knitted this boy, our boy, together with needle and thread, and I thanked God for that song and for creating a person who could write that song. I know that the song isn't about Henry. I don't think it's about birth at all. Maybe it's about someone's uncle or an episode of Grey's Anatomy. It doesn't matter, because the thing about a truly great song is that it becomes truly and deeply about our very own lives, regardless of what it started out as when it was written. A few months later, Aaron and I went to a Sleeping at Last show, and when they played that song, we held hands and I cried some more, and I thought about our boy, about the night he was born and the ride home and the thousands of moments in between of life with Henry and the rich and miraculous thing that it is to be his mother. I wanted to tell the songwriter about it, about how thankful we were for his song, about how deeply his song traveled through the tenderest parts of our life, about how the words and sounds had become part of the story of one of the most sacred events of our lives. As I walked out to my car after the show, I almost went back in to wait in line and tell him, but I knew that I would cry. Not sweet little tears, but the kind that make your nose and eyeliner run. And that very possibly I would try to hug him, which would be mortifying for both of us. I don't know a lot about being a rock star, but I do know that just about the last thing a rock star wants when there's a line of cute 20-year-old girls in skinny jeans and black nail polish is a 30-year-old mom showing him pictures of her baby on her phone and weeping. And so I didn't tell him. But if I had, this is what I would have said. Thank you. Thank you, and keep going. Please keep writing songs. Please keep believing in music, because we do and we need it, and specifically we need yours. We need the sounds and words and rhythms of hope and longing and beauty. We need the drums and the strings and the haunting twist of your voice. We're desperate for great storytellers, great painters, great dancers, great cooks, because art does something nothing else does. Art slips past our brains, straight into our bellies. It weaves itself into our thoughts and feelings and the open places in our souls. It allows us to live more and say more and feel more. Great art says the things we wish someone would say out loud, the things we wish we could say out loud. When Ryan from Sleeping at Last sings, that's how I would sing, except that I sound like a 5-year-old with a head cold when I sing. My friend Anne she dances the way that I would dance if I could. My friend Sarah creates paintings that make me feel alive and free and like the world is more beautiful than it was before I saw that painting, and I'm so glad she does. It matters. Art does so deeply. It's one of the noblest things because it can make us better, and one of the scariest things because it comes from such a deep place inside of us. I know that life is busy and hard and that there's crushing pressure to just settle down and get a real job and khaki pants and a haircut. But don't. Please don't. Please keep believing that life can be better, brighter, broader because of the art that you make. Please keep demonstrating the courage that it takes to swim upstream in a world that prefers putting away for retirement to putting pen to paper, that chooses practicality over poetry, that values you more for going to the gym than going to the deepest places in your soul. Please keep making art for people like me. People who need the magic and imagination and honesty of great art to make the day-to-day world a little more bearable. And if for whatever reason you've stopped believing in your voice, stopped fighting to find the time, start again today. Do something creative every day. Even if you work in a cubicle, even if you have a newborn, even if someone told you a long time ago that you're not an artist and you can't sing and you have nothing to say. Those people are bad people. And they're liars. And we hope they develop adult onset acne really bad. Everyone has something to say, everyone. Because everyone was created by God in the image of God, and if he is a creator, and in fact he is, then we are creators, and no one, not a bad 7th grade English teacher or a harsh critic or a jealous competitor, can take that away from you. So to all the secret writers, late-night painters, would-be singers, lapsed and scared artists of every stripe, dig out your paintbrush or your flute or your dancing shoes. Pull out your camera or your computer or your pottery wheel. Today, tonight, after the kids are in bed or when your homework is done, instead of one more video game or magazine, create something, anything. Pick up a needle and thread and stitch together something particular and honest and beautiful, because we need it. I need it. Thank you, and keep going. So in the process of writing that chapter legally, and just kind of to be a nice person, I wanted to tell that band about that song. Like, I'm going to put it in a book. Is that okay? And so someone, I think we had a mutual friend. They're from Chicago. From Wheaton, actually. Where's our Wheaton person? They're from Wheaton, Sleeping at Last. And so I got to email them, and then I ended up meeting them, and we went to a couple of their shows, and they were super nice, and they got us tickets. We were living in Grand Rapids. They got us tickets to a really beautiful show there at this little seminary with a string section. It was so gorgeous. And Aaron and I went, and we left, Henry with a sitter. And we went through the whole show, and it was so beautiful. And then as their encore, as their very last song, they played Needle and Thread, and they dedicated it to Henry. And I sobbed. And then when it was over, I was like, Aaron, do you think people know that that's us? And he was like, yeah. I think probably they do. I was like, how did they know? So it was great. It was super cool. Yeah. And after events, when men want to talk to me about this topic, they give me demos, they give me manuscripts, they give me all manner of things that they have created that they want to share with me, and they want me to tell people about it, and they want my feedback, and they want my help, and they want my connections. And women come to me with tears and with whispers, as though they have done something terrible by admitting that they have a dream to do something. I think that's a tragedy, and I don't think it's our fault. I know how it got there. But I think each of us, we've been talking about this all weekend, we each have a finite number of days and hours and months. We each have a finite amount of energy to spend on this earth. And if God has given you a creative dream, or an entrepreneurial dream, or a justice and service-oriented dream, whatever that dream is, I believe it is not just an opportunity. I believe it's a responsibility. And I would say for me, that's a very hard one thing. Again, I was saying how it's so easy to listen to contemplative people talk about Sabbath. It's really easy to hear gutsy, networky people talk about pursuing their creative dreams. I am not one of them. I am just now starting to tell people I'm a writer and I'm about to publish my 3rd book. I tell people I don't have a job. My husband's like, I think you do. The publishing process for me was incredibly nerve-wracking. I had to go to a lot of therapy to get, I'm not even kidding, to get to a point where I said, this matters. My voice matters. My stories matter. And what I basically had to say to myself was, listen, I believe that I have both a right and a responsibility to steward my gifts and tell my stories. And every single person on earth who's not me and maybe my mom has the right and the responsibility to not read those stories. They're not handing them out in prisons and saying you can't get out until you finish it. People don't have to read it. They totally don't have to. I'm not responsible for them. I'm responsible for my gifts and for my dreams because I believe God gave them to me. And so it's not just about whether or not I want to do it. It's about stewarding the life that God gave me. I think it's very serious. And I think at a certain point, it comes down to obedience. Fear will trip you up forever. Self-consciousness will trip you up forever. The voice of your parents or your bad teacher or your competitive friend or whatever will trip you up forever. But this is what I know about following that voice inside of you, whatever it is. It will cost you something, and what it gives you back is exponentially valuable. It will transform you along the way. This is about a totally different topic. It's not about creativity. It's about another thing that I was afraid of and that I had to get over. And that transformed me along the way. This is called run. I have long considered that there are 2 kinds of people in the world, people who can run marathons and people who can't. And I have long considered myself a permanent member of the latter category. I've always had the fundamental sense that something between my body and soul was disconnected, like a very important wire got cut at some point, and my body was off on its own, doing its own thing, being quite lazy and undependable. But I have also long held the belief that one's tears are a guide, that when something makes you cry, that means something. If we pay attention to our tears, they'll show us something about ourselves. Against my preferences, watching people cross marathon finish lines makes me cry. Crazy, deep, ugly cry. Specifically, watching average people cross marathon finish lines makes me cry. Professionals who finish in 2 hours are amazing, but it does not move me in the same way. And not all physical feats move me like marathons do. I don't cry when I watch the Olympics or the Super Bowl. There's a thing that I have with marathons. Several friends and my brother ran the Chicago Marathon a few years ago, and I finally said out loud, sometime in my life, I am going to do that. Me, really. I decided that in 2 years, I would be ready. I'd be 35, we would celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary, Henry would be 5, and it would be the perfect time to work off the baby weight after the baby that I was quite sure I was just about to conceive. You see where this is going, of course. I want so badly to release my stranglehold on my plan, my calendar, my way. I want to be the kind of Christian who really does believe that God holds the future and that even my best guesses are just that. I want to live without anxiety, without fear, without deadlines. But it seems that every chance I get, I grab back those pretend reins and allow myself to believe the myth that I'm in control. So I emailed a bunch of friends. 2 years from now, how about it? Let's do this. There were, however, 2 problems with my plan. The first, of course, is that it was all based on my assumptions of how life would be. The second is that it was far enough away to not have to think about it for a long, long time. That month, I found out I was pregnant with twins. Delight, gratitude, hope. And an hour before I gave the eulogy at my grandma's funeral, my doctor called with bad test results. Ultrasounds, blood tests, more ultrasounds, more blood tests. They knew at the beginning of the week that one baby was gone, and by the end of the week, the other was gone too. I don't remember very much from that week, except that my mom and my mother-in-law took great care of Henry as I dove into novel after novel to escape the plot twists of my own story. As with anything devastating and medical, for a little while the world stops, but inevitably it must start again. And just after my world started again, when I started returning emails and grocery shopping and doing the preschool drop-off again, I got an email from my friend Nate. Registration for the upcoming year's Chicago Marathon was open, he said. Was I still up for it? I immediately wrote a reply. No, not this year. Next year. We said next year. And as soon as I wrote it, I knew that that would always be my answer. Next year, next year, next year. I deleted those words and began again. Yes, I replied, before I could change my mind. Yes, I'm signing up. And I did, and then I dug out my running shoes, shoes that had been to the coffee shop and the farmer's market, but had never been running. I put on those shoes and shuffled around our neighborhood. It was March, less than 7 months from the race. I sent an email to my friends. Nate was already signed up. Jennifer, Kirsten, Deirdre, Blaine, and Margaret signed up too. We all signed up to run with Team World Vision. Our family has sponsored a child through them for years, and the money raised by Team World Vision runners buys wells and water purification systems for villages in Africa. Training began in April, and I was incredibly nervous for our first group run. It was a 3-mile timed run, and 3 miles was the upper edge of my limit. Also, the runners themselves kind of freaked me out. There was an uncomfortable amount of high-fiving and slogan exchanging. The atmosphere was all very happy and motivational, and I wanted to hide. Every time someone mentioned a 10-mile run or a 20-mile run with glee and anticipation, my stomach dropped. And then they'd say some clever running cliche like, if you can get to the starting line, you can get to the finish line. That didn't seem remotely true to me and did not help at all. But I went back again the next week and the next week and the next, and I began to understand what drove the acronyms and the slogans, the almost violent positivity. You need it, that kind of enthusiasm to get you up that early, to prod you along those miles. My life began to take on a new shape and rhythm. During the week, I ran in the evenings, often with my dad and Aaron after work. Sometimes I ran before taking Henry to preschool. I showered and did stinky laundry all the time. I could tell you every detail about every home in our neighborhood and every turn of the trail near our house. Little by little, I began to think like a runner. I shopped for comfortable sports bras and wicking fabrics instead of high heels and sundresses. I began drinking water obsessively and found that after long runs, I craved heaping bowls of salad. Over the months, my body got stronger and the miles got easier. At one point, a friend said, "Shauna, you have runner's calves." And it was the best day of my life. I went to bed early on the night before long runs and watched what I ate and drank on those days. What was interesting to me is I found that almost every runner I talked to had their own little cures and practices. Marathon runners are nothing if not routine-oriented and more than a little superstitious. I'm generally neither, but the process rubbed off on me, and I found myself setting out my clothes the night before a run, getting a little funny about the contents of my fuel belt. Really, all you need to know is that I willingly wore a fanny pack and called it a fuel belt. Every Saturday, the team runners showed up under the tender, brightening sky, nervous and sleepy. We ran and talked and ran and talked. We learned each other's stories and secrets and idiosyncrasies. It's amazing what you'll say out loud at mile 15 when no one's looking you in the eye. It's all side by side, mile after mile, hour after hour, and the miles act like some sort of truth serum. You talk about chafing and rashes and digestive abnormalities, and then someone tells the story of how she got sober or what it was like when his mother died. It's all out there with nothing but the drumbeat of your feet and the rhythm of your ragged breath and the green of the trees on the path. Each week of the summer, the miles got longer, 10 miles, 16 miles, 20 miles. Each week, I was surprised by what my body could do, this body I had long suspected, squared off against, blamed. In the same way that giving birth had connected me to my body in a new and meaningful way, the training gave me a new respect for my body, for what it could do, for how strong and powerful it was. Several members of the group I trained with and planned to run with dropped out one after another during the summer. A broken bone, an emergency surgery, a pregnancy, an injured knee. Kirsten, my patron saint of running, was my last hope. But when I talked with her the week of the race, she told me that a new job and a move and a crazy schedule hadn't allowed her to train. She was still flying in from San Francisco as planned, but she wasn't going to run. I drove to the city alone on Saturday, the day before the race, nervous to the point of tears. Not sure who I'd run with, not sure how I'd make it without the drum beats of my friends on either side of me at the race. Kirsten met me at the hotel, and I don't know if she had already changed her mind and decided to run since I talked to her last, or if she made the decision when she saw my panicky eyes. But in any case, she ended up joining me for every step of the race, my guide, my sister, my much-needed partner. The race was all the things you think it will be: hard, boring, emotional, long, euphoric. The first 13 miles are absolutely fun, as everyone says. In Chicago, Boys Town is the best section of the marathon. Costumes, music, choreography, unbelievable people watching. There were lots of friends in that stretch. Just before the 14-mile mark, my knee and hip started to hurt so badly that I got scared. Kirsten said to take some Advil and give it till mile 16. For an October day in Chicago, the weather was crazy hot, and at one point, Kirsten and I decided to speak only in cliches. There's no I in team. If you get to the starting line, you can get to the finish line. One foot in front of the other. Trust your training. Those long miles between 16 and 22 weren't horrible or traumatic, just hard and long and boring. The miles after the halfway point and before Chinatown are laborious, and there are no trees, no shade, much thinner crowds. I started to get a little bit emotional about the finish at mile 18, and Kirsten said, "Way too early for that, sister. Save it up." The course takes you so far south of the finish line that you can't imagine you're ever going to get back up to Grant Park. So when we finally made the blessed turn at 35th Street, I told Kirsten I was both a little disoriented and kind of angry. And then you hit mile 24 and you realize we're doing this. We're really going to do this. You make the turn onto the bridge at Roosevelt and you hear the announcer saying, "You're part of Chicago Marathon history. You're not just a runner, you're a finisher. You're not just a finisher, you're a marathoner." People were screaming and Lake Michigan was so impossibly blue. And Kirsten and I both burst into tears and ran the last straightaway as fast as our busted up legs could manage. I tend to believe the worst about myself. I could never do this. I'm not that kind of person. I'll always be like this. I'll never be able to get over that. But then I think about that day, and more than that, that season. I think about the miles on the green trail early in the morning and the taste of red Gatorade and the way my legs felt after those long runs. I think about the hushed, tense city the morning of the race, walking over in near darkness, all the runners wound up and silent, kicking out their legs over and over and pinning on their bibs. I think about the day after the race when Kirsten and I hobbled around our neighborhood, sore and tired and proud of ourselves. And I remember that people can change, that I can change, that the same old refrains can get rewritten, and that sometimes all it takes is paying attention to your tears and ignoring the voice that tries to hypnotize us with next year, next year, next year. And then the last one I want to read you, I said something this morning very quickly about my mother. And my mom is a totally extraordinary person, and there is one particular lesson in my life right now that she is teaching me over and over. And so I'm going to read that one for you. And then I think Aaron's going to come back up and do maybe one more song. And then you're going to go to your small groups. Does that sound right? Okay. So this is what my mother taught me. One of the most important things that my mom taught me, or really is teaching me over and over again, even now, is that the best is yet to come. Everyone knows those people who peak in middle school or high school or college. My mom is 60, and she's never been cooler. My mom is a global soul, a poet, an activist, a woman of creativity and conviction and vision, a woman I aspire to be like in a million ways. Over the years, my mom has been a social worker, a flutist, a stay-at-home mom, a writer, an editor, an oil painter, a potter, a world traveler, a contemplative, a volunteer global ministry leader, a speaker, an activist. She's an avid reader, an involved and loving grandma, a leading expert within the American Christian community on peacekeeping in the Middle East. In the last year, she's been to the Congo and the Middle East several times each. She loves to arrange flowers, and she also loves to travel to the darkest places on earth and bring those stories back home to us. When I get frustrated that there aren't enough hours in a day, that I can't do enough or be enough or experience everything I want to just exactly right now, my mom reminds me in her gentle way that this is not where she thought she'd be at 60 and that the best is yet to come. She teaches me through her words and through her actions that if you take the next right step, if you live a life of radical and honest prayer, if you allow yourself to be led by God's Spirit no matter how far from home and familiarity it takes you, you won't have to worry about what you want to be when you grow up, because you'll be too busy living a life of passion and daring. My mom turned 60 last November. We gathered my best friends and hers around my dinner table for lots of food and wine and laughter and storytelling. I've known her best friends for years, of course, but as the night went on, I realized that I didn't know how they all came to be friends. One after another, these women I've known for decades told the stories of how they first became connected to my mom. And the constant in all those stories is that her honesty invited them to be honest too. Her writing and speaking and truth-telling, so deeply against the grain for most pastors' wives, made these women feel like they could tell the truth too. Some of them sought her out in the darkest seasons of their lives because she had written so honestly about the darkest seasons in her own life. We sat around the table for hours, my friends and hers, eating chicken marbella and carrot souffle and frisee salad. We told stories and read poems and passages from the Bible and lines from songs, toasting and celebrating all the ways that my mom has made our lives better, has inspired us and set us free and been an example to us for how life can be if we dare. Sometimes I meet women who are so passionate they're just about to jump out of their skin. Their kids are getting older and the house is quiet and they want to do something. They want to get their hands really dirty and dive neck deep into something that keeps them up at night. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to move forward, so they're vibrating with pent-up passion, turning rapidly to frustration. And when I talk to them, I tell them the story of my mom. I tell them that there's still so much time and still so much to be done. I tell them that it doesn't have to be full-time or all or nothing or all at once. I tell them what my mom tells me, that you just have to take one step and that when you do, the next one will appear. I tell them that the path doesn't have to be a straight line and that often it only makes sense when you look back at it. I tell them that when my mom was my age, she was a stay-at-home mom. She wasn't yet an oil painter or a potter or an AIDS activist or an expert on peacekeeping in the Middle East. There's still time, I tell them. And I tell myself, there's still time. My mom makes 60 look good. And she reminds me every day that honest prayer transforms us, that the world is big and beautiful and waiting for us, and that the best is yet to come. Let's pray together. God, for every dream and idea and creative project and startup and thing yet to be born and made into reality, I thank you in advance for what you can do through each of these women and through the dreams that you have planted inside of each of them. I pray that you would help each one of us to silence the voices that say you're too young or you're too old, or you're too this or you're too that, or you'll never make it, or you're not that kind of person. I pray that those voices would become absolutely silent and your voice, the voice of hope, of redemption, of possibility, of action, would become louder and louder and brighter and more central in all of our lives and minds and hearts and spirits. I pray that you would help us to be absolutely fearless and totally obedient to the dreams that you've placed in our hearts. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen.
This song's called The Stand.
Ocean Hills at its best is when we are in it together.